How Satan must snicker when people are under the influence of the stronghold of pride. Pride makes his work so simple.
Our adversary knows all too well that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
What a triumph for Satan, to trap a Christian so that he or she is opposed by God.
We know all too well from the Bible that our Father cherishes the humble and pours out His grace on them. And it's His grace that makes all the difference in our ability to experience His love.
The self-centered absorption of pride acts like a barrier, keeping you from truly seeing yourself as others do. It's as if you have bad breath and everyone but you knows it.
It doesn't take much perception to recognize the self-centeredness that characterizes people influenced by the stronghold of pride.
Spiritual pride is just as pervasive, and it's as old as our Israelite ancestors. They too believed that they were special compared to other people. But rather than using their chosenness to serve God's purposes, they used it to gratify their own sin nature.
Paul writes in dismay about prideful believers who've heard the truth, but still go on sinning.
It's the same scenario today. The pride of being a churchgoer covers over the reality of hidden sin.
And how hard the stronghold of pride is to recognize when it permeates the people with whom you fellowship.
If you aren't experiencing the grace of God at work in your life, examine each symptom under pride very carefully. Our Father just might be waiting for you to cast down pride and become poor in spirit so that He can stop opposing you.
Have you ever stopped to consider that religiosity is really pride in religious disguise? Let me repeat that. Religiosity is pride in religious disguise.
Religion is man's testimony to himself, like the Tower of Babel. Through religious forms and practices, man develops his own way to approach God without having to relate to Him.
The spirit of religiosity encourages many to seek personal gratification in their religious forms and practices. The megachurch phenomenon relies on the spirit of religiosity to grow. Satisfied people, like satisfied customers, keep coming back.
But man's ways and God's ways have nothing in common because the goal is entirely different. To follow Christ, as the early disciples did, means emptying yourself in total servanthood to the interest of Jesus. You follow Him for His sake, not yours.
On the other hand, the spirit of religiosity causes clergy to measure success by nickels and noses. That means the people who attend and how much they give. The goals of many congregations are more like those of corporate America. We'll come back to this more when we discuss the stronghold of idolatry and worldliness.
If you're plagued by any of the symptoms that make up this stronghold, you're probably very at ease with religious settings and programs. The more smoothly the service and activity runs, the better you feel.
We want to stress right away that the stronghold of independence and divorce is not limited to breaking a marriage covenant. This spirit influences anyone who's shielding himself from relational pain.
Within its stronghold, the spirit of independence and divorce seems dormant until certain conditions occur in your life as a catalyst to awaken it. Maybe this anecdote will clarify how this stronghold operates. Our retreat center in Connecticut was also a working farm. In the spring of our first year there, I noticed a lot of moss growing in the pasture where grass should have been. One day, an older farmer stopped by. I mentioned my problem with moss and asked him what kind of grass seed I needed to plant. He told me, "You don't need grass seed. The seed's already in the ground. You need to change the nature of your soil. It's too acidic. Put lime on the pasture and watch the grass and the clover come up."
We did just as the farmer recommended, and sure enough, the grass seed came up. It had been there all along, just waiting for the right conditions. And that's how it is with a stronghold of independence and divorce.
Those hurts, letdowns, and misunderstandings from your past that you haven't dealt with biblically are like demonic seeds. Satan doesn't stir them until he can do maximum damage in your relationships.
Whenever you enter a relationship that calls for a deeper level of accountability, such as marriage, close friendship, or home fellowship, the spirit of independence and divorce is activated.
As the responsibilities in your relationship with others deepen and more is required of you, something happens. You find that as your relationship grows stronger, you have to make some personal changes to accommodate one another.
At some point, the spirit of independence and divorce agitates your soul. You start to chew on negative thoughts. Why do I have to change? I have rights. I don't have to put up with this. You get the idea.
The nagging little voice of that spirit of independence and divorce goads you. It not only wants to estrange you from those you care about, it also intends to callous you from ever letting yourself get close to anyone again.
The stronghold rallies other strongholds when possible. It especially relies on strongholds of bitterness, rejection, or fear and insecurity to cut off relationships.
Even though this stronghold is not limited to marriage, one of the indicators of this spirit's widespread presence in the Christian community is the flood of divorce.
As we stated earlier, the Bible Belt has a divorce rate that's 50% higher than among non-Christians in this country. And over 85% of divorces are now initiated by women. If you're a Christian woman going through this workbook, be especially diligent as you examine each of the symptoms under this stronghold.
Because this stronghold operates so differently from the others, let me go over the operation of this stronghold one more time for you. The spirit of independence and divorce forms over time when you don't deal with emotional hurts as the Bible requires. The spirit bides its time in your soul until a relationship becomes important to you. Then it agitates you, disrupting your sense of connectedness with the other person or people. Rather than being glad you're developing a deeper bond, you begin to resent that closeness. You feel imposed upon and start to grumble inside, nitpicking every fault you find.
If you're married, you find yourself pulling away more and more from intimacy with your spouse. You're more like a married single than a loving covenant partner, and you yearn for the days when you weren't responsible for anyone else but you.
If you're a Lone Ranger Christian, who's more comfortable in your shell of self-reliance than in interacting with others, you're probably being influenced by this spirit.
Your relationships are shallow, and you have little sense of relational intimacy with the body of Christ in your midst.